Hi, everybody. My name is Lucy Swedberg, and I'm the editorial director at Harvard Business Publishing in our education group. I'm delighted to be here today to present our session titled, Why Teach Students About Zombies and Superheroes. Hopefully that title alone grabbed your attention, but that's sort of really the point of our session today, is to talk about immersive and engaging learning experiences and hoping to really make the learning stick. I could think of no better educator to join us in our presentation today about zombies and superheroes and their role in education than my co-presenter, Chris Robichaux. Chris is a senior lecturer of ethics and public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And we're really honored to have Chris join us today. Chris, hi, welcome. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
So we'll cover a lot in our session and not a lot of time. So I thought I'd start with a pretty broad question, and that is, I hear words like ethics, Harvard Kennedy School, public policy, and then I hear words like zombies and superheroes, and frankly, it's like two worlds colliding. I'm wondering if, just to acclimate our audience, they're educators from all over, all levels, can you just maybe give us a sense of why are those concepts intertwining? How did you come up with the idea to bring those types of concepts into your teaching?
Sure. In my head, it all makes sense, and I hope that it makes sense for others as well. It's a great question to start with. For me, I've always viewed my task. I got my doctorate in ethics and philosophy at MIT, went to the Kennedy School, and from the very beginning, I've always been tasked with finding new and innovative ways to make ethics stick, to make it come alive, to make it be meaningful for the students there, and also more broadly to the public at large. I've sometimes said that ethics and philosophy more broadly is sometimes wasted just on philosophers. I love my fellow philosophers, but we often just write for ourselves. I think that's a big waste. And so over many years now, what I've tried to do is to take popular entertainment with a focus on scary movies and superheroes, things I love, and show that you really can extract some interesting lessons in moral philosophy, ethics writ large from those pieces of entertainment. It's a lifelong passion, and I'm very appreciative that the Harvard Kennedy School and other schools at Harvard have embraced it.
For sure. And I'll want to dig into both of those areas in just a moment. But I also know, in our experience working with you over several years now, is that you also think about different pedagogical vehicles through which these themes and topics can express themselves. So be it cases or simulations. And I can imagine there's a lot of thought that goes into that, but can you talk a little bit about why that variety is so important to you? Sort of why have you pushed the needle with the innovation and the different types of pedagogy that you're bringing into your classrooms?
So for me, it's not just enough to teach someone some interesting ethical principles. I want it to stick, right? I want to stay with someone. Moreover, I want them to see ethics all around them. I don't want them to just see it as the thing you talk about in a classroom. And so for me, you turn to stories, you turn to simulations, you turn to active exercises as a way to have the lessons stick more, and as a way to have them come alive more for students in the classroom once they leave that classroom. Ethics and ethical thinking should be all around us. They're in the popular entertainment that we consume. They're in the challenges that we face personally. So I really want students in my classroom to recognize that ethics is not just isolated to the classroom, but there's lots of different vehicles that we can use to explore ethics, and to have the ethical lessons that we try to arrive at stick with us once we leave the classroom.
For sure. And I can imagine that element of making learning stick and wanting to engage students. I mean, it's been an ongoing challenge for educators in normal times. If you think about what we've all been through in the past year, the pandemic, the external stresses and pressures that our students are carrying with them in the classroom, I can only imagine that sort of need to hook and engage sort of amplifies. I'm sure you're seeing that in your teaching, that becomes somehow even more important in the last year.
I mean, I'm seeing it in my life, right? I mean, I forget,
Yeah.
what happened, yesterday, let alone a couple of weeks ago. We're going on a year of being isolated. So yes, I could not agree more. Stickiness and interactivity and making things come alive has always been important for education. even more so this year when we are spending so many of our hours on Zoom, being zoomed out, really having challenges, just having things come together in a meaningful way, and not just appearing to be from some like faded dream from long ago. So I'm hoping that some of the stuff that I teach through popular entertainment, through simulations, that stickiness that I was talking about before, that really does break through some of the the COVID curtain that we're all under right now. The challenges to learning that are unique to being isolated and in front of a screen for so many hours during the day.
So I'm thinking about our audience and realizing that they might be coming to this conversation from all sorts of different backgrounds and perspectives. They're teaching different things. They're coming in with different levels of interest. So superheroes and zombies might not be for them, but to help them sort of picture what it is we're talking about.
I'm kidding.
Maybe they're for everyone.
You understand.
But I think to help our audience sort of try to visualize what this could mean for them, it might help to go a little bit deeper into both of these areas. And we'll start with the superheroes piece. I think to help crystallize this, could you maybe share, a part of your lesson, a part of your syllabus that you're trying to get after with a specific example of then how you actually incorporate a superhero story or assignment into your course?
Sure. So I offer a course through Harvard X, the Harvard Extension School / the Smithsonian, called Power and Responsibility: Doing Philosophy with Superheroes. And the idea is to do a whole introduction to philosophy by way of superhero stories. So early on, we randomly assign students a set of superpowers. Superpowers from all over the place. So you can end up with something maybe just a little bit silly. You can end up with like this unbelievable earth-shattering power. And then we also give students some tasks, starting with, all right, come up with a character that has these powers, tell us their backstory, tell us what their aims are, objectives are going forth with these powers. So we begin to get them to think narratively about their powers. And then as the semester proceeds, we ask them to consider things like, well, what might be a really challenging ethical issue that comes in front of your superhero? How would you resolve that issue? What would happen if you and other superheroes got together to debate some of these challenging ideas that come with a world that's filled with superheroes? How would you come down? For instance, on one version of this course, this online course was complemented with a live weekend session. This is some years ago now, and once I had it was only like 50 or 60 people in the room, not even, I think. And I had them all become their superhero characters, take them out, and then debate the same thing that we saw debated in Marvel's Civil War. Like, should there be an external agency that makes decisions about where to use superheroes and where not to? Or should superheroes be allowed to do this on their own? The point of these exercises is to engage, to animate, to get them to begin to think ethically in a new and interesting way, and to have fun with it. A principle behind everything that I do, and I'm sure we'll come back to it, is having fun and learning deep and interesting things are not incompatible. I don't know where we all felt that it became incompatible. Kids get this. We somewhat forget about it as adults. But you can have fun suddenly creating a superhero character and giving that character ethical dilemmas and still learn a lot about ethics, deep stuff about ethics along the way. So I hope that gives you some example of some of what I do in that class to bring this to life.
Absolutely. And I think it's actually a perfect segue. We can't go too much further into the session without bringing on the zombies. But I know that the way that you think about that is in the context of gaming, which I think is another element of making learning fun. I know we've partnered, Chris, on bringing your simulation experience, which you call Patient Zero, to life in a digital setting, an online setting, which we'll get into in just a moment. But I thought we could go back a little bit to the origin stories of this simulation experience that you created. If you could talk a little bit about the learning objectives that you were trying to achieve, and maybe then why a sim, and particularly a sim about zombies, you felt was the right vehicle for what you were trying to do.
Sure. So going back some years now, like over half a decade now, I was at the Harvard Kennedy School, and I had already begun to experiment with simulations as a mode of learning. And one of the professors there, who's become a good friend of mine, Elaine Kmark, reached out to me. She was starting a new executive education program, Emerging Leaders, and this was going to be drawing in professional students from all across the globe. and it was going to be offered on a regular basis. And she said to me, she said, Chris, I really like to design a simulation for these folks, and I'd like it to be a pandemic simulation. We should be prepared for pandemics. Boy, Elaine, were you ever right? And I said, all right, that sounds good. She's like, but here's the trick. These people will be from all over the world. They will have already dealt with swine flu, bird flu, HIV. We want to throw them a curveball. We want them to have to go through a simulation tackling something that they've never experienced before. Oh, and by the way, we need to be able to offer the simulation again year after year after year. So what can you come up with that models pandemics fairly well, but's new and fresh and won't get old anytime soon? And me being me, I confess I didn't miss a beat, and I looked at her and I said, Elaine, I think we should give them a zombie pandemic. And to Elaine's great credit, she's become such a good friend. She leaned back, she looked at me, and she's like, yes, let's have them face zombies. And the point of it was, I'm saying this so cautiously because there have been days when I think I'm living in a Black Mirror episode. I am hoping that zombies are not a pandemic we ever have to actually live with or deal with. So that's covered. But also zombie pandemics model real world pandemics in some interesting way. So it's not total fantasy unmoored from reality. There are some lessons you can extract from the fantasy that carries over into real life. And that's what the simulation Patient Zero tries to do.
Excellent. And we know sort of looking at the sim and the way that you typically had run it, it's sort of an in-person experience, to call it a paper game. Maybe it circled around an experience in a classroom. And we partnered together to start to think about how could we bring this experience much broader? How could we scale it? How could we bring it to more who could really benefit from the engagement and the learning here? And so that's when we started to think about, making this a digital online experience. Again, at the time, I mean, it's just sort of crazy. It's sort of how reality was mimicking what we were working on together. What I'm hoping to do is just to get the audience a little flavor of what we mean by this whole simulation experience, and to sort of truly insert a learner into a moment where they're going to have to make decisions, and that's where the learning coming from. I thought we could play a little bit of a clip, if you're open to that, sort of taking a look at how we opted to sort of build a world around a student in which they're sort of dropped in and then asked to go ahead and make some decisions that hopefully through their learning so far, you sort of started to equip them with how they're going to proceed in a really challenging leadership moment. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at what we did with Patient Zero in the digital setting.
I'm Nancy Romero, and as always, we remain hopeful here at the network. But what we will be covering tonight may overwhelm you. We are waiting to hear from our leadership's top advisors, the Quorum, who will be updating us live from the command center. But in the meantime, multiple reports are in from the Capitol and affiliates around the country of what police are now calling random violence clusters, including actual human-on-human bites. Sources at the Transnational Security Agency say 246 of these random biting attacks have been reported in the last several hours. Health Minister Dr. Paul Wagner joins us live from Capital City. Doctor, can you confirm that Capital City is the official epicenter of where these attacks began?
Thanks, Nancy. Well, first of all, we're now referring to these incidents as LBAs, or lethal bite assaults. And so far, the governor and everyone here at the Ministry of Health have tracked the first reported assault to Municipal General Hospital here in the heart of the Capitol.
It appears that we have some footage coming out of that hospital. Let's take a look. Have you seen this?
No, but I did speak to a colleague who was there. She reported seeing someone who had been tackled to the ground with a massive bite wound on the neck. When she went to check vitals, the victim popped up and assaulted her. Luckily, she escaped with only minor injuries, but she is in quarantine.
Do we have a cause yet?
Not yet, Nancy.
Thank you, Dr. Wagner. I hope we can check back in with you as we continue our coverage of this disturbing story. I'm receiving word that the Quorum has assembled, and they are in the midst of debating the next steps in regards to the response. The hope of the nation rests in their hands. The decisions they make will determine our fate.
So just an average class experience, really. I mean, Chris, can you talk about, I think this is showing the digital immersion version. what happens with your students when you're dropping them into something like this? I can only imagine the energy, the reception. Can you talk about that? What happens in the classroom?
Sure. So when we first started doing this, we were worried that, it's so fantastical, no one will be able to really enter into the fiction. They'll always be, a step removed. No way. It takes like 3 minutes. You saw in this video, and suddenly you're in it. What we see are students who are totally and completely committed to trying to work their fictional country through this crisis. So we see deep immersion. When I say deep immersion, I don't just mean that folks are buying into the fiction. I mean, they're taking these things to heart. I mean, there's emotional resonance going on here. There's stress in a good and productive way, like, seeing this trade-off versus this trade-off. Oh, we've got to go this way. Oh, this happened. Oh no. Complete and total immersion, high stakes, the sorts of things that you want at just the right level where you can have productive disequilibrium. And then, after that whole experience, to be able to step out of it and run a really rich debrief, asking students, all right, shake it off. You're not in that world. But let's look at the decisions you made in that world and start drawing some lessons to the decisions that you're going to have to make in real life.
And I guess this might seem obvious, but can you speak to the results, the impact on the students as they're walking away from something like this? Do you feel like, there's another way, a lecture or any other way that you could have sort of gotten to this deep learning? What are you seeing from students that really helps ensure that you've got to them in a meaningful and memorable way?
More of that stickiness that I mentioned and more self-examination. So I will have students 3 months, 6 months, a year, several years after going through the simulation reach out to me. I can just tell you, my inbox was just inundated in March and April of last year from a lot of students that have gone through the simulation before. But beyond that, regularly returning to me saying, I'm still thinking about the decisions we made in that simulation, or, this came up and it reminded me about what my group was wrestling with when we were in your simulation. So that stickiness is not sticky for the sake of being sticky. We want the lessons to be learned and remembered, and for individuals to continue to reflect on it. I think that simulations like this often also reveal things about ourselves. Like we'll say, these are the principles that I live my life by, and I'll never violate them. And then suddenly you're put into a really hard choice, and you don't follow the way that you thought you would. This is not a shaming moment. This is more a moment of self-discovery where you're like, maybe I wasn't as committed as I thought I was. It's great to learn that in a fictional setting when the stakes ultimately really aren't very high than out in the real world. So I see a lot of self-reflection that comes out of this, and a longevity to the ethical lessons that we want to impart. And that's, as an educator, that's gold.
Absolutely. So something that's sort of hitting me as I'm looking at all the examples of really thoughtful and innovative and creative ideas that you've brought to the classroom, whether it's superheroes, we're talking about running a simulation, which, there's the digital version, which can involve technology and a whole element there, or even the in-person element of assembling teams. If I'm an educator sort of coming to this, and I'm sort of overwhelmed pleasantly by listening to your ideas, and I'm getting creative, and I'm starting to think about how I might apply this. Admittedly, I might also be thinking like, wow, this is a lot. Like I don't know if I'm comfortable with running sort of an online sim game, or some of this sounds a little bit out of my reach. Can you talk a little bit about that? Sort of how would an educator, no matter where they are, what resources they have, start to apply at least the inspiration and the ideas that you're trying to put into the classroom in their own context? Great.
So the first thing that I would say is to all educators, take a deep breath. You can definitely do this, and you should experiment with it. And the principle I would lean on is, as educators, how often are we asking students to think outside the box, to be a little experimental, to try things and not be afraid to fail, because we know that that's where learning happens. Learning happens when we push against the boundaries a little bit. Maybe we do stumble, but we stand back up again. Let's start practicing what we're preaching in the classroom. That's where I would begin. Then I would move in and say, you do not need to design a hyper, elaborate zombie simulation in order to benefit from some of the lessons that we're talking about here today. Individuals, students, adults, and younger, we're naturally storytellers. We naturally get swept up into fictions. It's very easy for us to engage in role playing. You can go into a classroom with some very basic roles and some simple scenarios and just give students some straightforward instructions, and they're going to adopt it, and they're going to wrestle with it, and they're going to have a great learning experience from it. It's going to take a few sheets of paper, or not even. I'm still thinking in the days when we have classrooms. Let's go back to that for a moment. You can even do it on Zoom with whatever you're projecting or whatever. It takes very little to try this out. Also, you should feel comfortable to use the popular entertainment if you want to go that route, that you yourself love. I mean, students respond to authenticity and passion. It may not be what they love. I've had plenty of students come up to me and say, superheroes just aren't my thing, but I love that you love superheroes. And heck, I got into it listening to you talk about them and then having to do these activities. So if music is your thing, if this television show is your thing, lean on that to bring it in. I guess the overall message is experiment, feel comfortable doing so. Start small, because small is often all you need to get things going. But then if it works, don't stop from scaling up and seeing what happens from it. I really also think, and this is the last thing I'll say on this, is it's not just about us in the sense that more and more I see this demand coming from students. Our students now are very technically savvy. They're used to lots of different ways of stimulation coming their ways. They are sort of expecting educators to step up the game here a little bit and come up with innovative ways to grab them. And, I believe that we should both meet each other halfway, but part of that is us saying, yeah, you're right. We're still going to lecture because there's a place for that. We're still going to have you read, difficult things because there's certainly a place for that. But, we can also engage in play as a mode of learning. There's something to that as well.
So when we at HBP, we talk to a lot of educators all over the globe, and I still tend to get a little bit of the sense of, what if I try all this and it goes horribly wrong? I'm wondering if this pandemic, the situation that we've been in for about a year now, has sort of maybe opened the door to permitting yourself to go ahead and try it, because what's the worst that can happen? I'm hopeful that this sense of, if something fails, and I'm sure you have examples of times when you've tried something and it's not quite gone according to plan, or something hasn't quite worked out. Would you say that that's true, that maybe that there's a window here for educators to sort of seize that moment and to maybe try something and realize that the risk is relatively low? Is that fair to say, or do you think that there's something sort of holding people back about making a mistake or somehow messing up in front of students?
I think it's absolutely fair to say, look at what we've all had. Look at how we've all had to pivot over the past year. I know very few people that have not said that they have been taken way, way, way outside of their comfort zone and having to, adapt all of their lesson plans and such to an online format. And that's coming from folks who are very comfortable with an online format, let alone everyone else. The thing I would say is this. We do make mistakes sometimes. Not every simulation that I've run has gone well. Oh my goodness, absolutely not. But generally, students are more forgiving of us than we are forgiving of us. Often we ourselves take on more of this than the students are giving us. And that's because, let's be honest, I mean, we're classroom managers. We like a degree of control. And simulations, even when they're running perfectly, relinquish a little bit of control. If you're running a simulation where you know everything that's going to happen exactly, it's probably not that interesting of a simulation. We're sort of giving up some of the classroom space to students and saying, look, we're creating a situation. You're going to be reacting to it different ways. We don't exactly have control over that. But students like that we don't have control over that. They like the room to sort of navigate it themselves. And so even if it ends up not perfect, I think they respond well to the intentions behind it. Now, that said, even a disaster you can learn a lot from. That's the negative side. The positive side is more often than not, these things do work very, very well. I would feel it would be pedagogical malpractice to advocate for this if I felt that it was a long shot to get it right and just filled with minefields getting it wrong. It's really not true. Usually these are very receptive audiences and things often go awesome.
And I'd imagine, I'm thinking about it from the student's perspective too, and to have a place, a safe place in a classroom to sort of try on, different decision making, different opportunities for teamwork. I mean, what better space to try what will eventually become skills and capabilities that they'll really need to deal with this crazy world of ours. I'm sure that's something that you see from your students.
Absolutely. I mean, we want folks to wrestle with the hard stuff in a safe environment where they can totally screw things up and learn from it before they go out to the real world with very serious consequences. Folks, students appreciate that context.
Well, Chris, I'm seeing we're already toward the end of our time. I hope our audience today is inspired by your innovation and your ideas and really can find a way to see themselves in it and try something new in the class. I'm really appreciative of your time here today.
Thank you so much.